CCU Orlando and Akins Counseling Center present The Authentic Spiritual Journey, a weekly show featuring real and practical spiritual conversations from diverse perspectives here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. Today, episode 44, My Southern Roots, Part 1. And now, your host, Reverend Cynthia Alice Anderson.
Welcome to the show. My name is Cynthia Alice. This is the Authentic Spiritual Journey, as Dave said, and we are already at show 44. So happy Monday, friends. We're in 818 Studios with my amazing producer.
Hey, I am Dave Croft. What is happening, everybody? Hope you are doing well. And yeah, just hope you're you had a good weekend. I hope you're ready for an amazing week ahead.
Yes, happy Monday. We're always glad to be some of the first to wish you a happy Monday. And for some of us, we get up and we go, oh, Monday. But we want every Monday to be a happy Monday because you are living the spiritual life, you're enjoying life, you are engaged in what life has to offer. And in fact, you are one of the change agents of life. So this is what we hold for you and for all of our listeners, that we are difference makers in our world, and we really just see you as that. So welcome to the show. We're glad that you joined us always. And it's been a busy month, I know, for Dave and myself, right?
It's been a very busy month. Obviously, Easter, that was incredibly busy.
Wow, and special service.
And we had our first sunrise service. That was great.
Yes.
That was fantastic. And it's not something I do. A lot of Unity churches do sunrise services.
Actually, I don't know, but I grew up doing them.
Yeah, same here. Yeah, it was, all the time.
And as a matter of fact, that's a great entrance into what I'm speaking about today. Strangely enough, as Spirit would have it, when I was a kid, I was about maybe 7 years old, and I remember my mom waking me up and saying, honey, it's time for sunrise service. And I said, okay, and I went back to sleep. And when I woke up, there was a note downstairs that said, since you did not get up for sunrise, you can make cornbread.
You had the chores.
I had to cook for the whole family at like 7 years old. I didn't have to make everything. I think I made like the cornbread and the biscuits. It's like, well, since you couldn't get up, you are going to provide the food for the afternoon. So let's just say,
am I being punished?
Every year after that, I managed to get up for sunrise. So the title of today's show is My Southern Roots.
Yeah, it's interesting. My parents are from North Carolina, even though I grew up in California, my dad was a Marine. And so I was born in Hawaii, grew up in California, wound up in North Carolina. And
yes, that's right. Like in high school.
Middle school.
Middle school, okay.
So that was, growing up, I moved out back to North Carolina, didn't have an accent or anything. At least I didn't think I had an accent or whatever. But, you grow up on a Marine base in San Diego.
Oh, yes.
It's very multicultural, even back in the 80s, But yeah, just southernness hit me like a ton of bricks when I moved back. Yeah, and all that entails.
Oh man, you're absolutely right. And I know in there was racism and sexism and homophobia and
growing
all
up,
kinds of that.
Yeah, there was no black and white on a Marine base.
Hey,
everybody was green. At least that was my perception. Whether that was reality or not, but as a little kid Dave, that was all I knew.
Well, I think that's very true. I think the military was integrated way before what would you call civilians?
Right.
Civilians. A friend of mine in the military, who's also a minister, often tells me that, and he's a real champion for civil rights as well. I wanted to do the show. I'll say I didn't want to do the show. I was compelled to do the show, and there has been a lot up in my process around some of the wonderful gifts of growing up in the South. And Dave, as you mentioned, and as we've mentioned a couple times in the past, the racism that is so rampant in the South. And so that has to be talked about too. And as a matter of fact, my earliest memory of racism was when I was 6 years old. I had walked out of the public library with my mom and my brother, And there was a lot of people lining the streets. And I said, it's a parade. And, a little kid, wow, it's a parade. And I looked up and there were these men in white suits with white outfits.
The hoods.
And the white hoods. And I saw that and my heart sank. And I just felt, I didn't know consciously what it meant, but energetically, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And my mom, explained that's the Klan. And I was so sad. I don't know if I cried, but I literally like hung my head at the weight of what I was seeing. Because in my home, there was really not a lot of racism. There was a lot, all my friends growing up were Black. My dad's best friend was Black and was at our home all the time. Sometimes he was at our home more than he was at his home, much to his wife's chagrin. I'm still in touch with him today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Mr. Willie. And so, that was such a break. I want to say it was a waking up, but a waking up to what was really happening, which was kind of a break of my denial, I guess. It's kind of like some of my childhood innocence got broken.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Going to school in North Carolina versus, a military base or whatever. I grew across the street, and on one side there was a white family, then there was a Samoan family, and then there was a Hispanic family, a Black family next door, all within 1 block of each other. And that was growing up in California. That's exactly what it was like. But the loss of any innocence in school, when for the first time you're realizing that someone's making an us versus them
Yes.
kind of
that awareness.
demarcation about different skin colors. That was kind of a rude awakening for me. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why that was a thing. Like, okay, his skin color's different. Okay, mine's this color and his is that color, and he's from Samoa and or whatever.
To a kid, it's a no-brainer. Yeah, you only hate as a child if you're if you're taught it, and so many of the gifts I received from the culture I grew up in, which was very mixed, Black, white. We grew up in what people now refer to as the hood. It was just a poor neighborhood, and as a child, they moved in housing projects, and I lived in a neighborhood where there had been like pilots and flight attendants, like just a couple of streets over. And when the housing project moves in, they call it the Great White Flight, and and a lot of my school changed overnight from predominantly white to predominantly Black, but that was not a problem for me at all. Like I said, my all my friends were Black. My mom ran our Girl Scout troop, and I was the only white girl. We just had fun with it. We were always, they were putting gel in my hair and giving me cornrows, and they always wanted to feel my hair because it was so soft. And we joked, we laughed, we did just what other kids do together. So none of that was a problem. And then in school, at some point I switched to a private school because my teacher, who was Black, happened to be Black and was an amazing teacher. I'll never forget her, Mrs. Lawrence. And she said since our class sizes had grown so much that I needed to go to a different school. And she was just telling several parents that. I mean, there were 2 white kids in my class, and it was me and a boy. And there were some amazingly smart African-American kids as well who she encouraged to move schools. So don't hear me say a Black teacher said move away from the Blacks. No, it was that there were so many kids in the classroom who happened to all be Black that she wasn't running a classroom. I mean, it was just pandemonium. Pandemonium. I'd had probably like 20 kids in my classroom, and we went to 60.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So she talked to my parents about moving me to another school, and I went to a predominantly white school. And honestly, I felt like I lost my whole culture because because I didn't understand. I know this sounds crazy. I didn't understand the way these people thought. These rich, affluent white kids. I just did not feel like one of them. And of course, I was also gay coming into that. As I got to school there. So anyway, that's always in there. And then in my first couple of years of the school, there was a classmate, or actually he was a year older, but we were on a school bus trip, and he showed me his membership card for the KKK. And he was quite proud of that. And of course, his dad was a member and such as that. And the school was a Baptist school, which, historically, Baptists have been very racist.
Yeah, especially Southern Baptist
yes.
denomination.
Yes, exactly. So I certainly was hit with that. And so that's all in there in what I'm going to talk about today. But the truth is, I somehow feel like there comes a time in one's life where, and it seems to be this time for me, where there comes a time where one needs to honor the past, right? So I'm in this mode of being in memory about some of the. I'm getting these flashes of images right now. That's why I'm stammering with my words. If you're watching the video, you're probably getting that. But if you're listening, you're going, why is she not saying something? Well, one reason is my eyes kind of filled up with tears, and I was thinking of people, places, meaningful situations. And so it's like, but I didn't want to start the show acting like, well, the South is some rosy thing, which when told from a white perspective, it sounds like. But for me, the kind of coming together, or it's more like kind of a mashing together of the black-white cultures that has happened, or that happened in the South through slavery, is still trying to work its way out. But it's included in everything I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's like a splinter that gets in there, but it has to it's got to work its way back out.
Yeah, and I think for me, there's so much positive that the South has to offer. And when I went to college, I remember when I went to college, I went all the way to Seattle. I don't know if you knew that, but
yeah, I think so. Yeah,
it was a huge culture shock, because
from Georgia to Seattle.
yeah, and I went there because there was a certain teacher I wanted to study with. His name was Dr. Hansen, and I had seen him teach a conducting class, and then I also knew the percussion instructor was from the symphony. Well, the great news is my percussion teacher was black. Praise God. I saw him come in the room, and I said, "Oh my God, I'm so happy to see you." And I gave him a hug, and he goes, "What?" I said, "Where are all the black people?" I said, "I'm dying here with all these white people." And he burst out laughing. He goes, "We're going to have fun together." But he's the principal timpanist in the Seattle Symphony.
Oh, wow.
African-American man, a great teacher. So I met him, and then I was in my first sociology class, and because it was a Christian college, Seattle Pacific University is where I went to school. It's still there, a wonderful liberal arts college in Seattle, just on Queen Anne Hill there. And the teacher, who was amazing, said, who would like to pray? Well, I'm from a Christian school, so I'll do it, So I stood up to pray, and I said, "Dear Lord," very Southern.
Did you lean into it on purpose?
No. That's how it sounded to them.
Gotcha.
And everybody laughed. I said,
so they thought you were about to bring, brimstone and hellfire?
Well, as a matter of fact, so this is what I want to speak about, that two thoughts instantly came into people's minds. One, because I was told this later, because I asked a friend, what was so funny? One, they assumed I was stupid.
Mm-hmm. Because of your Southern drawl.
Because of my Southern drawl. Two, they thought I was racist. And so I started the process of trying to unlearn and to be unaccented. Mm-hmm. I tried to copy kind of what I heard around me in Seattle because, well, one, I didn't want to be laughed at. I was 18 years old. What did I know?
Right.
And
New college, you're trying to fit in, and
yes, I was already
and you can rewrite your own story when you go to college.
I was already in major culture shock. I mean, it's like, what are Birkenstocks and why is everybody wearing them? And I think I didn't really realize until many years later. I was speaking at a Unity church in Detroit, in Michigan. It's called Renaissance Unity, and my friend was the minister there. Before him, Marianne Williamson had been there. So it's a really large Unity, and I was speaking there, and the choir director, music director, who was African American man, after the first service, came up to me and said, "Why are you trying to hide, Southern girl?" And I was like, hey, and he was right. I didn't realize I was trying to hide my past, as a Southerner, because, well, it was more convenient and people wouldn't laugh. But what I realize is there's a lot of cool stuff from the South, and there's a lot of beautiful history, and my friends, my family, are there. I'm from there. Really, my Southern roots are so strong, and even in my family, the lack of racism goes way back. My granddad was the first to sell land to blacks in that area, black men especially in that area. And so, and I grew up in the first integrated church in Georgia. It's Red Oak United Methodist. My godfather was the minister there, and it was under his leadership we became the first integrated church. So it's like, yes, there is racism in the South. There's racism everywhere. Yeah. In the South, though, it's in your face because they're not hiding it.
That's right. And like my grandparents, my grandfather especially, my grandmother was a elementary school teacher, so she was just kind, and gentle, and just soft-spoken. My grandfather, I never heard him like disparage like a black person, but he would drop the N-word. Yeah. Like, and it just as matter of fact, it was just descriptive. The same as we would say black or African American, he would just be N-bomb. Yeah.
Right. That's really common.
But it was just kind of worked. It worked in there, and even I knew, just because we were in California all by ourselves, right? Just our little family.
That's right. I forgot that. Yeah.
And so grandparents and cousins and aunts and uncles were all in North Carolina, and so you plop a bunch of middle school and high school kids into North Carolina. Who have never really grown up around extended family, and now suddenly they all have these, funny accents, and they're using, racial slurs, and you're like, this doesn't feel right.
Like, what is this?
So I knew it didn't feel right, but I had a hard time squaring. I'm like, well, my granddaddy isn't racist because I've never heard him like say a black person can't do this or whatever. Right. But he was so cavalier about it.
Yes. Yes,
that's a tough corner to round.
It is, and a lot of my family, by the way, is from North Carolina as well, and there's a lot of racism really in North Carolina. I mean, if I had to compare any town in North Carolina and any town in Georgia, I'd say North Carolina in terms of the racism is pretty thick.
North Carolina was the first state to cede from the Union during the Civil War.
Yes. Yes. I know it's hard for us to believe sitting here today that was common practice. In my home, the N-word was not allowed. It was not common practice. There was occasion when my dad was explaining his view on the word. He and his friend Willie would talk about it, and so I was never around, say, in my household where blacks were so disparaged in the way that they were. Basically culturally. And so because of that, I got so many gifts from the black community that I cannot imagine using the N-word.
No.
It's just not in my consciousness.
I've had extended conversations with my best friend in high school, who was black. Mm-hmm. I've had extended conversations about that. Yeah. And how, like, I can't stomach it. I can't hear it. I wish the word would just evaporate from culture. Mm-hmm. But he's trying to, he's tried to explain to me about retaking the word and owning the power over. Yes. And even still, because I haven't walked through that experience. Yeah. I haven't walked in his shoes, and I haven't been
Right.
pulled over, and all that stuff, or been called that.
Right.
I still,
Well, gay people have done it with the word fag, as well. But yes, I've heard that, and I certainly honor that that walk with the word, because you can only be disparaged for long, but for so long, and you finally go, that's right. And it's my word now, and I'm going to use it how I want to. So, people are often surprised that I love the comedian, or I did love the comedian Richard Pryor. And he had quite a transformation in terms of his life and his career. And I remember seeing one of his stand-up routines after he had been to South Africa. And it changed him permanently in how he thought about blacks and black culture. He himself, a black man. He said, there is no N-word. That's made up. That's made up from whites. I'm never using the word again. So he got a renewed sense of self. It's like kind of going to the motherland,
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, in talking today, I think at least in the beginning, it's important for me to honor the past. And so I'm just wondering, for our listeners, could that be a thing for you as well, where you're from? Have you had some, ways of trying to hide that from the world, hide that from yourself?
I'll own that.
Yeah.
I admit I don't want to say being not ashamed of like having a Southern accent or whatever, but I am proud.
Yeah.
I grew up proud that I was from California and not from North Carolina.
Right. Because the first thing somebody's going to say is that white racist.
Right. And even just now I'm kind of realizing, maybe that's a little backwards. Why? I don't need to be ashamed of that, because that is as much of a label.
It is.
You're from the South, you're racist. That's as much as a label that you can put on anybody or any group of people, and it's a prejudice and a bias that I admit to probably holding on some level, because I didn't want a Southern accent.
Right.
At all. I
Right.
did not want one.
Right. Well, and after when I was in college, I would come home on this like on the Christmas break, and I would work with my brother in his jewelry store. And my brother's a very talented jeweler and business owner. And anyway, sometimes people from Atlanta would come in, and this one woman who was really Southern, one time she said to me, "Are you on TV?" And I said, "I'm sorry, what?" And she's, "Are you on TV?" And I said, "No, ma'am." "Why?" She said, "You talk like them TV people." And with that, we'll go to a break.
That sounds good.
We'll see you in a few minutes.
We'll return to the program in just a few moments, but first, we wanted to give a special word of thanks to our podcast partner, CCU Orlando, who has helped make this episode of the Authentic Spiritual Journey possible. CCU Orlando is a welcoming community dedicated to transforming lives, celebrating diversity, and supporting soul growth. Christ Church Unity is located at 771 Holden Avenue in Orlando, Florida, with Sunday services at 9 and 11 a.m. You can stream services live online, as well as learn more at christchurchunity.net. We'd also like to extend our thanks to our podcast partner, Akins Counseling Center. Cassandra Akins is a licensed mental health counselor dedicated to creating sacred space where clients can explore their own inner process in a safe, non-judgmental, and supportive environment. She works with individuals, couples, and groups who are seeking to live a more authentic life. Akins Counseling Center is located in Winter Park, Florida, and can be found on the web at CassandraAkins.com. And now we return you to this week's episode of The Authentic Spiritual Journey.
And welcome back. We're here in 818 Studios, and our show today is My Southern Roots. I guess it should be Our Southern Roots.
Yeah. And you know what? We just dove right into the topic.
Did.
We forgot about our country shout out.
I know, and the shout out today is to India.
Yeah, we are honoring and acknowledging our listeners in India. Thank you so much for listening to the show.
Oh man, I can't tell you what it means to know somebody from India finds this valuable. I really want to go to India if I'm being totally honest. I'd really love to visit, and maybe one day we'll go on tour and we'll do a live Indian broadcast. Let's just keep that in mind, Dave.
I am fascinated by Indian culture. I'm
Yeah, me too.
fascinated by Indian music.
Oh,
Indian dance.
topless, baby.
I'm just. I cannot get enough of it. Indian food. I love Indian food.
Oh yes, masala dosa. We love it.
And really, my jam is chicken tikka masala, which I understand. That is the California roll of Indian food.
Well,
it's the safest of safe food. But
I've been wanting to go to the even though Sai Baba has made his passing, I want to go to the ashram where Sai Baba is, where Sai Baba was, in his hospital. And I have been a studier of many, many years of Paramahansa Yogananda and of Sai Baba, and just been so guided and led by the teachers of the East, and certainly those coming from India. So bless you, friends. We love you. We bless you, and would love to know and hear from you just which podcasts in particular are supportive of you. I always, when I think of India, I always think of this really very spiritual place. You know, my partner's been, and I know several people who have been. And, you know, I know that cab drivers all have Ganesha on their dash because of the remover of obstacles, you know. So anyway.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and also like the Diwali celebration and knowing that in Shannon's artwork for our Easter celebration and the explosion of color, she drew inspiration from the Indian Holi festival.
Beautiful.
Which is like where they throw powder and all that stuff. So really just completely just fascinated with Indian culture.
So we honor you, we bless you, and thank you for listening. So we are in this show, My Southern Roots, and Dave and I are both from the South, and I just feel I'm going to take out that word just. I'm going to get T-shirts made, no just. I feel, because that word just makes it, just minimizes it.
And you just said it.
I know 3 times. That's tough. So we want to honor the past. And my feeling has been that by talking about it, it might lift it up for our listeners as well. That's right. And, you know, I recently turned 50, and there seems to be some hearkening back to the things of the past. Not as like I want to go back there, but honoring what is back there and how it fuels me today. Like there's a place, we have some really interesting family coolness. I will be honest that I grew up on the same land my mother grew up on, and in a different house, but the house my mother grew up in, she and her siblings built out of rock. Excuse me. She and her siblings built out of rock that they found going to and from school on the land itself. And her father, my grandfather, was brilliant. He was fluent in 5 languages. He knew 7. He had served as a missionary in Brazil through the Methodist Church. And he's also the minister who was a minister in Orlando. And so was his father. So my grandfather, my great-grandfather, were both highly educated ministers and both served here in Orlando. But the home where I grew up was on the same land as the home my mom and her siblings built through my granddad's direction. And in one part of the house, there was this, and we always call it the rock house because that's what it was built out of. And he had these incredible ideas that were so advanced. Like you went into the bathroom and there was a sunken tub. It was on the floor level, so they dug out underneath so that you could just walk in and then go sit in lie in the tub. And then there was one side of the house that they built a bus into the house, and so it was like the sunroom. So if you wanted to open the windows, you had to use the crank on the bus to open the windows. So the bus was literally a part of the house. So there was something really cool about growing up that way because there was such a connection to the past.
Yeah, there's a sense of permanence, which I honestly get reminded of anytime I go to the UK, specifically like a town like Wales, even in Germany, these villages. There's
so much history
there, and like Shannon her family on her mother's side of the family own land, and their fathers own that land, and they're only one or two generations removed from running water and electricity.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then
Oh.
there's a permanence to the culture, to the heritage. But
Yeah.
even the word heritage has a little bite to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Confederate flags and statues have kind of co-opted that idea,
Yeah.
which I've seen Shannon walk through. She's very proud of her Southern heritage and reads up on it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
Civil War wives and these kind of things. But yeah, it's tough. But there is a sense of history there.
There really is. There really is for me in many, many ways because of that home being there, and the home, believe it or not, is still standing, which is, kind of hard to believe. And it was a very special place. That land. I mean, I used to meditate on a rock there, my big rock, as I used to like to call it, and I didn't know that's what it was, but I would I would listen to the sounds. I would hear the creek, and that was really home to me. Much more so than the home I grew up in. But that home for me was the woods, and I loved, my family, and I loved my parents, and I knew they loved me. But the woods were, were really my home, and then that connection between that home and my home was extremely grounding. And even the school I went to was the same elementary school my mom went to for a time. And that's highly, highly unusual today.
Yeah. Growing up in the military, I didn't really get that, there wasn't a sense of permanence. If you were on military housing, and, when you moved out, then somebody else was going to move in, and someone else lived in that house before you did, and it wasn't passed down, and there were no real traditions. And again, by the time my dad retired, where that kind of gets instilled as a child, I feel like that kind of passed me over.
Yeah, the interesting thing too, but you had other experiences too, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah, like the idea of every Sunday we would go to the beach.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds
growing up
cool.
in San Diego,
That doesn't sound too bad.
It's not too terrible. That's what we did Sunday afternoon after church.
Well, it's interesting because of how we grew up and because of the location of the land and the home and everything. It was highly unusual that when we were kids, we did not have running water either, and that's like a generation too late to have something like that.
Right.
Like my mom and her siblings had an outdoor shower that was, water from the creek. And when we were kids, we played in the creek, and then we were building our home we lived in. So we started with 4 cinder block walls and a tin roof. Today that sounds like, my God, that should have been your parents or grandparents.
Right.
But we were living that way. And there's something really powerful about it as I look back, because we had this kind of homegrown creativity. We learned to make something out of nothing, and so I still carry with me that drive, that desire, that need, that ingenuity, that if I need something, I can look around and probably figure out how to make that happen. And actually, through my whole life, I was always the one who, I was not the kid necessarily first chosen for the sports team, but I got to play, and then I got to score, and then I just had a lot of fight and drive. And I think it was largely because of how we grew up. There was not a lot just given to us. We had to work for it. And so somehow that homegrown creativity is still in my bones and still in my blood, and it's really returned. It's returned with a vengeance. Lately, I've been making a lot of things. I think I'd mentioned it a few shows ago too, and it's really right in my face in a good way. It's this. I just feel compelled to do things with my hands, to make something out of nothing. And it's so rewarding, quite frankly, to just go outside and pick up a stick and whittle it into something. Or with pieces of willow we have at our church, I've never really even talked about this. I guess basically my partner and my son know about it, but I make these things called ancestor rings, and it's where you use pieces of willow and you bend them a certain way, and it looks like a head with the pieces of willow look like hair, and they have like an energy to them. That's super cool. And the only reason I'm sure that I do that is because of how we grew up. We were in the woods. We had time to play and figure things out, not like every minute book the way we are today. So I don't know, friends, if you're connecting with this or if you have things like that, but I think one of the reasons I'm bringing it up is I feel like we're so technology driven now that we forget to do things like that bring us a lot of joy, to make something out of nothing, to need our minds and our ingenuity so we don't have to just, look it up.
Right.
We don't have to Google every single thing.
Like you talked about whittling. I would have to Google how to whittle.
No, Dave.
Step one.
No,
Google whittling.
No. Move away from the computer.
Then I would go on Amazon and find the best reviewed whittling knife I could find.
Exactly. That is insane. Well, that's the other thing. You use the knife you have.
Yeah.
And it was always something that had been laying around that was kind of old. We were talking when I was together with my brother. I should make my brother listen to this podcast because I'm sure he does not. My brother Jeff and I, we were kind of. I was more like the little brother because the brother in between us was gay, and he would rather be off with mom and I would rather be with the boys. And there was this hill near our house. I mean, we were quite unsupervised, and there was tin left over from building the house. And so there was this big hill, and it went down, but it went down into this big area that just dropped off. There was this big like sewage pipe, and then like rocks, and then the creek. So we would get on this piece of tin that was rusty on the edges.
Yeah, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? By the way, that was rusty on the edges. Right. And then we would go down this big hill and then jump off just in time before we went down into the ravine.
It was like your own Calvin and Hobbes moment.
Hey, that was my life. Only it was really happening. It wasn't just a comic strip.
One of the things I did notice, just even little kid middle school brain, is how beautiful the South is.
Beautiful.
I mean, there's a beauty to San Diego and seeing the mountains and snow-capped mountains and on canyons, and that's all beautiful. But wow, especially a state like North Carolina, which is mountains and beach, and there's a little bit of New England around Cape Hatteras kind of vibe. It's no wonder the film industry, kind of was drawn to it. But there's so much untouched rural parts. Not that rural areas don't exist elsewhere, but I've been into rural Kansas before.
Yes, me too.
And it's flat, and it's
cool, but it's very
cool,
different.
But it's not twisty, windy roads, and you mentioned willows. There's a melancholy to to some of the foliage, and I don't know. There's something intangible about it that I think only the South can kind of capture.
I think you're right. For me, it's the smell of pine trees. That's home. That for me. The smell of pine trees. Of course, in Georgia, you get a lot of kudzu. So seeing kudzu growing and taking over muscadine vines, and there's also sassafras tea that you can only have in the winter because you're digging up the roots to make it.
My Aunt Nancy she'd make sweet pickles and muscadine jelly.
Oh man, there ain't nothing like that.
Can you say the word muscadine jelly? Not in a Southern accent.
I know, right? Muscadine
jelly.
Yeah, and my granddad made wine out of it, of course, being the good minister he was. Well, he was a Methodist after all. And at the end, Dave, if you can find it, I want to have you read a poem my granddad wrote. And if we don't have it for this show, we'll share it the next one. But it's called The Gods of the Blue Ridge. And Dave, while I'm finishing up on a couple topics, I want you to look at it because there's some words that are not normal that are in there. Gods of the Blue Ridge. It was put out by the Southern Literary Review. I want to say like in the 30s, like maybe 37 or 39. It's called Gods of the Blue Ridge, and it was by Henry Fraser Bailey, Bailey.
I'm looking.
But it talks about, and it's in my book too, Seven Spiritual Laws of Release. I printed it. For the book because it talked about the beauty and also it gave a much wider understanding of God. And my strong feeling is if my grandfather would have ever known unity existed, I'm quite sure he would have been a member because his view of God was so large. So, friends, I hope what we're saying is impacting you today. We are talking about my Southern roots, but again, it's not really about me. It's about all of us as humans and how we grow up and how those memories live with us. And my encouragement to you today is to begin to really honor the past. And for you, it may not be an accent or it may not be a place you lived. It might be a person that was special in your life, but to really begin to think about how can you honor your past, and are you honoring your past with your life today? And so, I think one of the ways I'm working to honor my past is by continuing my work with civil rights and equality for all. And it's something I was taught at a very young age, and it was something I really lived with some of my friends and was taught that. It was a way to honor the past by continuing to live that legacy. And then by making things, by creating something out of nothing. And then even just remembering fondly my some of those childhood memories that really, really helped make me who I am today. And then go out and make something, make something out of nothing. Figure out how to whittle without Googling. Figure out how to appreciate something from the past and creating something now. And especially creating something, you can just do it for the sake of creating it, not to get monetized, not to even necessarily make for someone else, to make it for the sake of making it because you have the skill to do it. Somehow to me, that honors the God within by simply making something. And I lovingly call that my homegrown creativity. So I hope you'll join me in that. So Dave, did you find the...
I did find it.
Okay, great. It's called Gods of the Blue Ridge.
Out of the far-flung horizon did my startled eyes behold bright tinted curtains of azure and lilac and crimson and gold, drawn by aurora at noontime to hide where the god had fled from adventurous eyes of a mortal whose steps their stage had led. The Gods of the Blue Ridge by Henry Fraser Bailey, published in the Southern Literary Review, August 1932.
All right. Thank you, Dave. That was actually part of it. That's not the whole thing.
That's not the whole thing.
It's quite large. But that's all right. That's a great start. He may not have had it all for that. I think that was on this friend of mine's blog. But we will get it to you in a future show because that is such a special, special reading. So we do appreciate you joining us today for My Southern Roots. Again, we encourage you to honor the past, to make something out of nothing, use some homegrown creativity, and we'll hope you will join us again. And again, all of our listeners and viewers from India, bless you. We acknowledge the divine spirit within you, and to you we say namaste. Thank you, friends. Blessings on the journey, and we hope to see you again at the Authentic Spiritual Journey.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Authentic Spiritual Journey presented by CCU Orlando and Akins Counseling Center here on the Experience of the Soul podcast channel. This channel is made possible through the continued support of our angel patrons, Dove Borland, Angela Martinez, Peter Gibson, Paul Caswell, and J.J. Hamilton, along with our partner patrons CCU Orlando and Akins Counseling Center. If you would like to help be a part of bringing shows like this and other programs to the channel, please consider becoming a patron. You can learn more about supporting the channel, along with show notes and information about our other programs at experienceofthesoul.com. And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can help spread the word by leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or the platform of your choice. The Authentic Spiritual Journey is copyright 2019, Cynthia Alice Anderson, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. The Experience of the Soul podcast channel is a production of 818 Studios.